With us constantly on the big analog horrors, there are series that end up not being as lucky. And to break the ice, here's a new iceberg that I made about disturbing new analog horrors. Yes, we are back to the analog horror grind, and I'm Sir Chris. I explore the internet and I make videos about it. Let's go. Surface. Angel Lair. Angel Lair is such a sweet analog horror. Angel Lair is a series created by the Mannequin sisters on the East Patch channel. The story tells us about Jonah, a kid who did not have a good childhood, who loved watching a television show that stopped airing called Angel Lair. After disappearing and being forgotten, one day, in a thrift store, Jonah finds the tapes and nostalgically buys them. But upon watching them, the episodes were not as he remembered. This is where the story begins. The journey to remember what was once dear to him, which sadly also brought sour memories. The episodes were simple. Angel Gabby would be called by Francis, the honey badger, for help, in which it always ended with a lesson being taught to the viewer. But upon Jonah rewatching his VCR recordings, he notices that the tapes were actually made for him. Gabby would directly support Jonah, give him company, talk, and entertain him. Along with the tapes, we realize how bad his childhood was. He was physically abused by his father, to the point of needing to use his friends to escape his own struggles, needing to lock himself in his room, and even hide in the closet. And even in one moment, a weapon was involved. And later in the story, Angel Lair stops being an analog horror and turns into an analog safe place. Except if you're Wendigoon. There's also a conspiracy that Gabby ended up somebody, most likely Jonah's father, because of the alibi part, and the flooding incident that destroyed all records. But I guess we'll never know. Where did life go? This one is short, it's like 2 minutes long. Where Did Life Go is an episode created by Dr. Nowhere about a world where entities try to live the life of a human being. It mainly focuses on Jappy's routine. Like a human, he tries to brush his teeth, gets stressed, and goes to work, anxious for the day to end. And once he gets back, tries to get away from life's monotony by doing what he loves. If you think this is relatable, then see this. Despite his worries, Jappy continues to search for a meaning, something or some reason that will help him keep living. But fortunately, Jappy eventually learns to appreciate the little details of his strange world, like its beauty, and even the strange flower that had his face. Guys, I know that life gets clouded sometimes, but yeah, don't forget who you are and appreciate the little details. Be like Jappy. Botanophobia. This one is self-explanatory. Botanophobia is a short single-episode analog horror created by Alex Kister. It tells us the story of Stephanie Duval, who was born with the phobia of plants. For a comical reason, months after Stephanie was born, her mother became a florist, something that she loved. She was afraid of plants because, unlike a human being, she would never know if a harmless plant was really harmless. This fear caused her to have a mental breakdown one day, which from then on, her mother stopped having plants in the house, except for the sunflowers, which were harmless. Even Stephanie agreed. But things would quickly take a dark turn. Delphine, Stephanie's mother, unexpectedly dies of a heart attack and is reincarnated in Stephanie's worst nightmare, now proving that in that world, plants are just as lively as humans. Underwater. Liminal Land. I've already covered the early stages of Liminal Land, but a lot of new stuff came out since then. Liminal Land is an ARG/analog horror created by Nexpo and Nick Crawley. It talks about a giant amusement park that existed in Lake Valley, New Mexico in 1975 with the intention of being the biggest and the best in the United States by providing an immersive experience of liminal spaces. The park had everything: lively attractions, pools, uncanny liminal spaces, and even rentable houses located underneath the park, where clients could stay as long as they wanted. Just for you to have a grasp on how big this underground area was, in total, the houses contained up to 10,000 rooms that would be maintained by a small team. During its 14 years, there were several incidents that never came to the surface. Missing people, rides constantly changing from one day to another, and even accidents. But everything came boiling down in 1989, when one night, without a word being said, the park closed, and those who were still inside are rumored to have stayed there forever. This is where we start to investigate. Among various contents, there are certain pages that gives us a glimpse of what actually happened. 9 people have gone missing, Liminal Land's CEO decides to sell homes for permanent stays, and since 1984, things have been declining incredibly fast. Here is where we get to the new stuff that I wanted to update you guys with. New documents came, like a page from a 1959 science magazine where the CEO of Liminal Land appeared, along with his dangerously unstable invention, which made people laugh. It later being suspected by police to be used in the laugh track, as it caused several deformations that were never covered by the media. But as we dive deeper, there's footage, which reveals that there's more that we should be afraid of. In addition to trying to keep you there as long as they could, they also did it forcibly. And deeper in the home section, we see that the park had a cult. The Moloch cult, responsible for several, if not all of the disappearances we saw. Tale of Two Earths. What if we were never alone in this galaxy? Tale of Two Earths is an analog horror series created by the Fallen Star, which covers a topic that we have all thought about. It's a small analog horror series, so I'll quickly break it down for you. In Tale of Two Earths, humanity discovers another planet identical to ours in 1983 during the Cold War. With this discovery coming from the United States, they are the first to communicate with the other planet Earth, so they could have a upper hand against the Soviets. After a few attempts at communication, Planet B ends up just responding with SOS, and then cryptic messages appear. You are annoying. Ignore us. Leave us alone. The third episode tells us that through satellite images, Planet B could be dying, but without certainty, it remains just a theory. More messages appear telling them again to stop contacting them, and that now, the people of Gaia only had 3 chances. The episode ends with Planet B destroying one of Planet A's satellites, being this considered the first act of hostility. With this action, humanity from Planet A considers their options, one of them being the most drastic and somewhat immoral. When they recovered and analyzed the destroyed satellite, they noticed that it was covered by organic matter. But before they could reach a conclusion, they are interrupted by a message coming from Planet B. More specifically, a message from Gaia, who was trying to reach for assistance, but they couldn't stay long, or else the entity would realize what they were doing. But they were unlucky, and now they only had 2 more chances. After some time, the Soviet Union also discovers the existence of Planet B, and tries to make contact with the same intention as the United States. And now, they only had one opportunity left. The fairy tales. What if the stories you heard as a child were turned into an analog horror? The Fairy Tales is a 4-episode series made by Foxymations that puts a twist to the stories we know. I'll be quickly breaking them down, starting with the Little Red Riding Hood. One night, as the Little Red's grandmother was sick, the mother asked the daughter to take the candy basket to the grandmother's house. Despite the late hours, Little Red accepts, and goes on her way to the grandmother's house. Deeper in the forest, she realizes that something wasn't right, as several carcasses of dead animals could be seen. And those thoughts would be right. The wolf appears and talks to Little Red. She eventually spills the beans, thus turning that task into a race to see who would get to the grandmother's house first, obviously being the wolf. Upon taking Grandma's life, he waits for Little Red to arrive so he could kill her, which he does, and Little Red's mom also dies. After these deaths, news spread to the point where a hunter, called Hansel from Hansel and Gretel, decides to put an end to the horror. Armed with an AK-47, he goes into the forest and finds the dead animals, as Little Red did, but shrugs it off and continues, only to find one of the victims' house. Inside, upon finding Little Red's mom's corpse, Hansel discovers that he had company. Without saying a word, Hansel quickly fires at the wolf, striking him in the eye. And later in this fight, Hansel strikes him twice again, and he dies. With no one to hunt in that part of the forest, the wolf goes to hunt for the 3 little pigs. You already know how the story goes. The wolf kills the first 2 pigs, and the third makes a final sacrifice. With gasoline, he burns his house to the ground, thus taking himself and the wolf out, setting the victim's soul free. Except for Hansel. With only one soul left, Gretel remembers that her brother hadn't come back for 3 days since he left on his hunt. With no one to turn to, Hansel's unrested soul ends up haunting Gretel and leaves her a note saying to follow the breadcrumbs and to not trust her. Armed with a Glock, she goes into the forest and does what the note tells her to, only to find a remote candy house. Upon knocking and questioning for her brother, the witch tells her to come in, which Gretel does. Inside, we realize that the wolf was actually a child who was bullied. One day he snapped when his house was set on fire and went on a killing spree, later selling his soul to be quote-unquote unstoppable, except if he was attacked by his deepest fear. Gretel doesn't believe this, but what choice does she have? With a heavy storm happening, Gretel ends up spending the night in the witch's house. In the middle of the night, she ends up exploring the basement, only to find a book that conveniently revealed the witch's weaknesses. And in a true analog horror style, she gets caught, but luckily manages to kill the witch, and thus free her brother's soul. Project 1976. Project 1976 is like the first episode of the Walton Files that we never had. Don't get me wrong, it's pretty clear that I love the Walton Files, but I wish that the first episode was this high quality. First, it was made by Bond Film Studio, and it follows the story of a sandwicheria from Texas that opened in 1975 by a local couple that had animatronic performers called the Carrot Farm Band, composed by Jackie, Quack, Fury, and Scratch, who are mostly controlled by employees on a computer. Much of the pilot shows as an advertisement for the sandwicheria, where on August 10th of 1976, a child disappeared inside the establishment. Daniel, in an attempt to make the place safer, asks the engineer to create a new animatronic called Zack. 1 month later, when the animatronic was finally done, Daniel Schmidt almost dies due to a short circuit that caused Zack to almost attack him, now confirming that Zack was going to be the security for the sandwicheria. And the pilot ends. Simply incredible. Middle of the ocean. The Oddity Compendium. What type of hot entities does our world hide? The Oddity Compendium is an analog horror made by Dr. Nowhere. In it, an entity reveals to us some oddities that exist in our reality. The first oddity was a parasite called Mattress Folk, which was discovered in 1960 by a mattress company that upon finding excess stock, ended up donating it to charity, which resulted in several disappearances in the summer. This oddity remains dormant for long periods of time, until it wakes up upon reaching a specific temperature. While awake, the entity would wait for the victim to be asleep, to then slowly swallow their entire body. The second is called the Headless Macrocosm, a surreal world identical to Earth, easily accessed, but with no means of escape. This alternate world had only 2,400 people, all of whom had existed in the real world, being their last memory sleeping in a weird circumstance. Instead of being filled with humans, it had thousands of gigantic headless corpses. Although inoffensive and steal, they would hit a human being if you touched them, and use their head to replace you in the real world. Humans here have a harsh time surviving, living in abandoned buildings, and only leaving when it's warm to search for food. Just pray you don't brush against one of these oddities around the corner. The third one is called the Obelisks of Enlightenment, and they're the most interesting. They're a kind of a bizarre pillar that is connected to the universe, responsible for giving the Egyptians knowledge to create the pyramids of Giza. They attract humans by making an angelic noise, and once in their range, the victim's head either grows so much to the point of exploding, or unlocks the ability to understand the sacred information and is devoured. And now a fan favorite, Philbus. A religious oddity will create Philbism, a secret religion focused on making and eating chairs that spreads like an advertisement. Until now, there's no way to counter his existence, and the tape ends with the entity from the beginning cleansing the viewer with an audio, just like a doctor from nowhere. Obelisk. A recent analog horror that has been gaining a lot of attention. It was made by Lizard Manic and only has 5 episodes. To be brutally honest, even after watching the videos and reading some theories, the lore is still unclear. Obelisk begins with a person, most likely a kid, saying that he made a friend that lives in his closet. Upon showing us his new friend, he stated that he doesn't like being watched. And for last, in his room, we see how terrifying this entity is, before it slowly hides in the shadows. The second tape shows us a hallway, in which another entity opens the main door that was somehow found in the middle of the forest. So, do entities enter victims' homes through doors found in their dimension, disconnecting the unnatural with the natural? I tend to believe more in this theory with the next episode. In your home, the parent wakes up to the uncanny cries of a baby, but weirdly enough, we realize that he had a chair on the doorknob. Was the parent hiding from someone? However, the parent eventually goes to the room where AB was, only to find out that it was all a trap. And it ends with the confirmation saying that the entity entered even with the doors locked. The house with no windows is the biggest, yet easier to explain. It follows our protagonist, who found a weird looking house in the middle of nowhere. He manages to find his way inside through a crawl space hidden behind a piece of wood. Once inside, we get to see that the house was not meant for anyone to live in. Huge and even unreachable doors, furniture in the ceiling, and stairs that lead you nowhere. Deeper in the house, we realize that the house belongs to the first entity. Is perhaps our protagonist the same kid? Especially because the last sentence says, "I know your face." And now the most mysterious one. Why do you keep us here? Which starts with the cemetery, where the entity sees a cradle with a caterpillar. The parent says that Abby was different, and is chased back to his room by the entity that apparently attacked Abby, only for the video to end with the phrase, "Please forgive me." There's theories that vary from Abby growing up to become something that her parent didn't recognize, to simply a monster tormenting its prey before their final hour. The Mannequin Tapes. The Mannequin Tapes is a digital horror series created by Spring Talk. The series has only 4 episodes and tells us about an entity in the appearance of mannequins that had already been contained, but for some reason ends up escaping on December 13th of 2004 in Queensland, Australia. We follow Casey's group, who were goofing around until they found the mannequins, who started to chase them. The entity moved like a weeping angel, and if they caught you, you would become one of them. On the same day, the incident was so bad that the government advises all citizens to stay inside, but quickly changed their minds, as in just 2 hours, the mannequins have spread across Ironbrook, and an evacuation alert is issued. Our group tries to escape, which they narrowly succeed, but the contingency fails, and thus, becoming a national emergency. With no other option, the government decides to bomb the infected cities to avoid contamination of the next ones, taking many innocent lives and scarring Australia forever. Stone Cold. An outbreak of an ancient virus. Stone Cold tells us about the demise of human beings because of their curiosity. It was created by Mythical Films, and it tells us that in 1979, in Italy, an illegal excavation took place, which discovered a chamber that had 6,500 petrified bodies from an ancient civilization that existed in 79 BC, called Pompeii. When they opened the chamber, strange things started to happen right away. From the excavation group, the only one who was not protected was a doctor in a wheelchair, who after inhaling an orange gas that came out of the chamber, he got up and started walking. With that miracle, the cave looked promising. They extracted all the bodies for further analysis. The company intended to inject the virus into paralyzed people so that they could walk again. It did not go as planned. Various casualties happened around the world, all because of the previous virus, eventually called the Medusa virus. It spread through eye contact and through the air. The infection had 3 phases. In the first, the eyes swelled and the pupils expanded, this being the only phase where salvation was possible. In the second, the infected person suffered from several symptoms, and in the last phase, they became paralyzed and the eyes explode, doomed to maybe suffer eternally. Later in the outbreak, the unlucky survivors would have to stay in their homes with fence, doors, and windows sealed, and life on Earth would never be the same. Deep Waters, the Clockwork Visitant. This one is short and unique. The Clockwork Visitant is an analog horror that for now only has 1 episode that was made again by Spring Talk. It tells us the story of an Australian soldier who during the First World War became incapacitated in the middle of the no man's land. There, he noticed a dark figure with a clock as his head, standing unfazed by the battlefield. Both never broke eye contact until rescue finally arrived, where then, the creature ominously fades into nothingness. That experience traumatized Thomas, to the point where 3 years later, he made a painting to describe what he saw that day. Thomas would mysteriously die in 1990 in his own house by the creature, with his mother finding nothing more than his skeleton in just 12 hours. Upon reporting it to the police, an investigation started. Files said that this wasn't the first time that the creature was seen, dating back to a woodcut from the 1600s, found in a cottage associated with witchcraft. This would also not be the last time, as in 2005, Reuben Hill also dies from the same visitor as seen on his camcorder. Is this visitor the Reaper who came to claim those who were supposed to be dead? Because here's the thing, right? Reuben Hill was also known by police by a recent drunk driving accident in which he was very lucky to escape, but I guess only on the next episode. Angel Engine. How far will the selfishness of one go in search of power? Angel Engine is an analog horror from TikTok, and it tells us about a humanity that is close to extinction. All Earth's resources have been exploited, along with the death of all wildlife. Millions are starving, the world is on the verge of a war, and with nothing left, society prayed for help, with the sole intention of caging an angel to siphon its energy for profit and to perform miracles. This story is told step by a demon who brainwashes a scientist to find and build an angel cage, with the promise of restoring Earth to its former glory. Eventually, an angel called Uriel comes down from the sky and gets caged in the second Tower of Babel and is subjected to various methods of torture. Even with this heartless decision, Uriel pleads for them to stop, but Geoff, the head leader of this project, declines. With this selfish decision, not everyone took it lightly. Eventually, Geoff says that he no longer needed the angel because of his new invention that was going to be shown in Beersheba. But now if he released Uriel or not remains a question. There, an audience member tells him God is coming several times before shooting him 3 times, thus taking Geoff's life. It isn't clear if he really died, since the journal states that this happened in 2033, yet Geoff only died in 3033. For now, the series ends with Geoff's death and the uncertain fate of humanity. Would you guys like a deep dive of this series in the future? Gloaming County. Gloaming County, it's an ongoing ARG mixed with analog and digital horror. For now, there are only 4 short episodes and a website. The mystery surrounds a county in South Carolina called Gloaming County that has had a questionable past and is trying to maintain its good reputation now. During the tapes, for some reason there's a curfew that has not yet been explained, and even strange recordings. Keep your eyes peeled. Something isn't right. On the website, we get to know that a couple of mysteries still haunt this county, such as the disappearance of Shelley Fennell, probably by the abomination that she thought was an angel, the spread of rot in the county, and the fact that the number of deer around the county has not increased. In fact, the rest seem to suffer from a strange mutation. Their bodies get twisted, they get extra limbs, and horns grow out of their eyes. But here is where we are left in the dark. Bottom of the iceberg. Children Under the House. Children Under the House is an analog horror made by the creator of 10G Water, Vintage 8. In it, we follow the recordings of a therapist, Julia, who works together with another therapist, John, on an extremely bizarre case. The victim's family moved from Texas to a house that once belonged to a respectable couple in Louisiana. Keep that couple in mind. From then on, the child began to hear voices under the house for several days. After several days of her parents trying to convince her that the voices did not exist, one day, Jess, the victim, became so scared that she screamed until her voice gave out. After several tests, none of them were able to identify the problem, which led the family to seek help from a therapist. This is where we pick up the story. The first session starts off strangely right away. Julia, after seeing a drawing, asked her whose bear it was. Jess replied that it belonged to a friend of hers, later confirming this to be an imaginary friend case. Over the course of several sessions, their bond grows, and Jess starts to open up. She revealed that her quote-unquote friend was called Maya, and she looked worrying. There were more than 10 children under the house, Maya was dead, and finally Jess reveals the names of the others. Julia, at one point, starts to get agitated because of the information, and at the end of the session, starts to research several new articles about the children's names, only to find that all those names were tied to a string of unsolved disappearances and murders of children, in what police believes to be a human ring. By putting the drawings together, Julia discovers that these kids have all gone missing in front of the old burger shack owned by one of the most respected families in Louisiana, the Clarks. Julia, in search for justice, ends up putting the family in hot water. Jess's father loses his life in a robbery gone wrong, and Jess had 4 strokes by trying to leave the voices. If things couldn't get any worse, Jess doesn't seem to be getting better, and the Clarks eventually finds out that Julia knew too much, and tries to kill the rest of the family, including Julia. But here's the catch. As the children were before they died, they didn't know who actually killed them. And with the Clarks revealing all their names, now the spirits knew who to attack. And the tape ends with the couple being dragged to the darkness, alive, never to be seen again. Ghostmachine. This entry is just a pilot, and it's very unique. Ghostmachine follows a family, especially 2 brothers, April and Griffin Pierre, in which Griffin was born as a goat in a world full of humans. The family's father died in a factory fire that claimed the lives of more 99 men, and the location of the destroyed factory is remembered and called Black Bush by locals. Griffin only had online friends, spent a lot of time alone, and he couldn't leave the house due to the rational fear of other people's reactions. So much so that the last time he left, he almost got killed, but by a stroke of luck manages to get away. But now it was too late because the news had spread. Desperate for closure, and with his mom not giving him any answers, Griffin and April built a machine with the intention of using it in Black Bush to speak with his father's soul. Since, who could be the best person to give him answers, right? And this is where the pilot ends. Honestly, I'm kind of excited to see more of this. And this was the updated analog horror Iceberg. If you liked any of the entries, please support the creators. Support your boy on social media. A huge thanks to all Patreon support Pawn, and you viewer. And take care, my friend.